This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Roed. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR community. This is going to be an amazing conversation. I'm already excited. I have been waiting patiently to have this conversation because I think this is going to be a critical tool in our toolbox as HR professionals. With us today, we have Scott Mautz. He is a keynote speaker and author of the new book, The Mentally Strong Leader: Build the Habits to Productively Regulate Your Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. Something that we all deal with every single day. Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me on. Can't wait to talk about the sweet spot of human resources, trying to regulate when we want to strangle somebody.
I love it. Yeah, there is a sweet spot there. It's like an equation, and it's, we work in the gray. It's like, where am I at?
That's right.
Well, thank you again so much in fitting us into your extremely busy schedule. You're all over the place, and you've got this new book out. I'm really excited to dig into it today and to spend some time talking about it. The first question that I have is, I know that undertaking a book is no simple task. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of energy, and in some cases, some heartburn that goes into writing a book. And so I'm curious, knowing that, what motivated you to write a book on this topic?
Yeah, I grew up in corporate America, probably like many of the listeners, Kyle, to this show. And I spent almost 3 decades really studying what made great leaders great. Why do achievers achieve at the end of the day? And I kept noticing a really interesting thing over and over and over again, which is this concept of mental strength, separating the wheat from the chaff, if you will. Again, you mentioned it a little bit within the title of the book, but mental strength is the ability to regulate your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors for productive outcomes, even in times of adversity. It's said another way, it's how we manage internally so that we could lead externally. And I think, Kyle, we all intuitively understand that you have to be able to self-regulate emotions, thoughts, and behaviors to succeed. I think we all know that, but here's a clue. Let me let you in on a secret. It's really hard. It's really hard to do that. So I noticed throughout the years that what kind of separated people who were good at their job and they were managers from true leaders, ones that just cracked the code, the cheat code for achievement, were leaders that had this incredible, quiet mental strength about them. They had this ability to control their emotions and productively regulate them for good outcome. They were very thoughtful and intentional about how they thought about things and how they showed up to the organization. And they even spent time building habits to increase their mental strength over time, effectively training their brain for achievement. And we'll talk more about that later. But so I started to identify this idea of mental strength being almost the leadership superpower of our time, separating the people who just manage from those who truly achieve. And I remember thinking, because I've been thinking a lot about this topic, I have to share what I've learned with the world about the importance of mental strength and how to achieve it through practical tools that I started developing years ago and testing and retesting. So it's that drive to share the power of increasing and becoming mentally stronger with the world that really drove me to write the book, The Mentally Strong Leader.
Mm. I really appreciate you calling it out. That this is really hard.
It's really hard,
right? I mean, I think again, intuitively, we all understand. We have to have some level of mental strength and some level of regulation in how we interact with the world. But and especially in an occupation where you deal with human beings on a regular basis, and that's kind of the majority of your job, whether you're in HR or leadership, or interacting with your family. That this is not an easy thing to do. And I think one of the things that I appreciate that you've done with this book is you've put it into a context that can then be used as a toolkit. Right. So there's a way to start to think about, okay, how do I actually kind of work the muscle of mental strength. And I think that that's something where it can be frustrating, where maybe we read an article or we get some coaching on being mentally strong, but there's not the rigor or the tools or the tactics on how to actually do that. And the reality is you have to practice, right? It's a practice. It's also a journey. So you can't just read a book and be like, all right, I checked the box, done. Now I'm mentally strong. All right. And I'll prove it because I've got this book behind me. Right? But I'm gonna lose my mind the minute that something doesn't go right. And maybe I need to read the book again.
Yeah, and building on that, Kyle, I want to help put your listeners at ease, because we all know, as we said, that this is really hard to do. It is really hard to self-regulate your emotions, thoughts, and behaviors to show up as mentally strong. But here's the good news. I asked 3,000 executives a central question, thinking of the highest achieving organizations that you've ever been a part of, the ones that overcame the most obstacles. Thinking of those times, what were the attributes of the key leaders in that moment? And over 91% described the same exact profile of a leader. And what they didn't know, the respondents didn't know at the time, is they were describing mentally strong leaders that were exercising and flexing 6 core mental muscles, the 6 mental muscles that make up mental strength. And those are fortitude, confidence, boldness, decision-making, the ability to stay focused on your goals, and the ability to, as a leader, to message positively to the troops, keep a positive demeanor about yourself and a quality of your presence and an integrity to your intent. So the reason I share that is through my research, I've identified that mental strength, not only is it the cheat code for achievement, increasing mental strength is how you train your brain for achievement. And you do that by building 6 core mental muscles, these 6 that I've just described. Now, in the book, The Mentally Strong Leader, to help people do that, it starts with a mental strength self-assessment. You can take the assessment. It's 50 different questions. It takes you about 15 to 20 minutes of quiet, deep thinking time. And not only will you get a score that equates to your overall mental strength score, you also get a score by mental muscle. How do I do on fortitude? How do I do on confidence? How do I do on boldness, et cetera? The other 3 muscles I described as well. And then the Mentally Strong Leader book gives you tips for how to level up in the areas that you want to. And here's the good thing. People don't have to feel daunted by that. Like, oh, there's 6 mental muscles that I have to build all the time. If you go to the gym, Kyle, you don't go in with a mindset of, I'm going to build every muscle all the time with every workout. Right? Wednesday might be leg day. Thursday might be shoulder day and chest day. I don't know. You go in deciding to build certain mental muscles. And that's what the Mentally Strong Leader book allows you to do. You can create your customized mental strength training program based on how you scored on the mental strength self-assessment, and then pull the levers to build those muscles accordingly. So it doesn't have to feel like a daunting thing. We all have a baseline of mental strength to work from, Kyle. It's not like the opposite of mental strength is mental weakness. We all have a baseline to work with. You just need to know what muscle to work on at what times. And the Mentally Strong Leader book helps you do that with over 50 plus proven tools that will help you do that.
So I think this is such a powerful approach. And I think, I think it's super, super necessary too, because you can't look in the mirror and be like, oh, I need to develop my shoulders because my posture is bad. Right. No, you're like, oh, that interaction went horribly. Why? And if you don't have like some sort of like somebody or something, or maybe you're not fortunate enough to have somebody that can help you be self-reflective on, hey, maybe you should have had a little bit more confidence in that meeting, or you know what, you knew the right answer. You should have been more bold. And I think we could have prevented this from going sideways, a couple of weeks ago. And I think the other thing that's really critical about this topic is so much of our jobs, all jobs today are about thinking, right? They're knowledge jobs. So many knowledge workers exist in this world. Why would we not actively work out our minds to make sure that we're ready to achieve and perform within our jobs, not dissimilar from an athlete getting ready to go and work out so that they can run a 100-meter dash, right?
Yeah.
And work the appropriate muscles so that they can be effective. Well, we need to be thinking about the same way as it relates to our brain.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And importantly, Kyle, the mentally strong leader helps you with that workout process that you were just describing, because you do that through habits. Right. That's why the subtitle of the book is Build the Habits to Productively Regulate Your Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. And I have been studying habit building science for a very, very long time. And in the Mentally Strong Leader, I embrace in the writing of the book, several different core principles of creating habits. The first being, you have to have repetitions. If you want to form a habit for better confidence, you have to have repetitions in practice to enable you to do that. Repetitions happen through systems and frameworks that you can put in place that automate that behavior. And every one of the 50-plus tools in the Mentally Strong Leader are essentially systems or frameworks to help you get those repetitions. Point number one about habit building. Point number two, and there's three of them, also in the Mentally Strong Leader, we have embraced the habit building science rule of, if you want to build a habit, you have to start with one small step. But you have to know what that first small step is so you can begin. Many habits are never formed because they were never started to be formed. Mm. And there's a section for every habit out of the 50 habits and tools in the Mentally Strong Leader that will help you identify what's the first small step you should take in building this new habit to be bolder at work. And the third habit building science element built in, it builds around the inflection point of when you're trying to build a habit for goal focus, to stay more goal focused, another of the core mental muscles. What do you do in moments of weakness? What do you do when you find your attention being diverted and sucked away by other things, which, by the way, happens to all of us all the time, every single day? There's also a section called In Moments of Weakness for every tool, so that you know how to overcome that moment when you're falling down to actually build the habit that will lead to increased mental strength.
Powerful. I think, it's been interesting. This is probably more self-reflective than anything. It's been interesting over the last few years, how focusing so much on your core strengths can kind of put you into this mindset, the habit of not thinking about the times where you are kind of weak, right? Yeah. Or you have that, right? And it's easy to kind of ignore that, but the reality is, if you do, it can be really detrimental, or as I call it, like a derailer, right? And at the end of the day, I also think, and feel free to contradict this if your research says otherwise. I also think that we kind of naturally have these tendencies to be strong in certain aspects of these mental muscles, and ignore some of the others, right? Like, and I like to stick with the weightlifting analogy. It's like, I love doing bench press, but but everybody says never skip leg day. But gosh, I hate doing deadlifts. It's just not, it's not my strongest. But the reality is, if you replace that with, I'm great with messaging, but I'm not so great at boldness. You're going to have an imbalance somewhere, right? That's going to show up in some way, shape, or form. So,
yeah, that's right. And what's interesting, Kyle, just to follow through your example. So let's say you really hate leg days, and in the case of mental strength, let's really say you hate the idea. I'm making this up, of being bolder, which would not be the case for you given the name of this podcast, right?
Maybe it's just aspirational, Scott.
Maybe it's aspirational, right? but let's say, a listener out there is like, okay, I got it. Mental strength, the core mental muscles got it. Fortitude, confidence, boldness. Okay, I feel good about those. Then there's decision-making, goal focus, and messaging. Yeah, goal focus, I'm not so good at that. And I hate even thinking about that. Here's the beauty of the Mentally Strong Leader, the book, the approach. It's the only book with over 50-plus proven tools that have all been tested, but they've been designed, Kyle, as a menu. So that even if you're like, gosh, I hate the thought of working on goal focus, right? Becoming more goal focused, or I hate the thought of being more bold. There are multiple tools within each chapter about that muscle that allow you to choose from, because we know in habit building science that if you don't find a routine that fits something that's right for you, that you really like, you're really going to fall into trouble and you're never going to start the process of building that habit. So there's a menu of options to choose from. So for even those muscles you're reluctant to build, I am sure you will find a tool within the menu to help you build that muscle.
We'll be back after a quick break.
And so used to having everything in front of them right away that we forget that innovation just takes time. I myself, I get frustrated too. Why? And you know, this is being one of my best friends is, hey, I talk to you all the time. Hey, man, I'm frustrated in the fact that I can't seem to just get there in the next day. But that's just not how these things work, right? Innovation needs to be planned out. It needs to be very methodical. And then when it finally hits, that's when it seems like to everyone else that it sort of just came out of nowhere. But to you, you know the amount of dedication that it took over that time.
So I want to dig into that a little bit because I think it'd be helpful for our listeners to kind of maybe walk through a little bit of the tool. And I think the other thing I wanted to mention as you were talking about forming these habits is, you know, I love the fact that you're focusing on this is a small step to start, right? Like it's not like you're not breaking the world with this habit. You are starting small, you know, you're starting with 5-pound weights. You're going easy, and eventually you continue to build up the mental strength. And so I want to focus in on one of the areas that I think our profession as a whole could do a whole lot more with, and that is boldness. Because I think a successful HR professional that's really been successful at bridging the gap between administrative to strategic human resources typically has the ability to have some boldness. And I think confidence kind of is included in that as well. So for those HR professionals that are maybe struggling with that, or they don't necessarily want to make waves, but they know that there's something they need to say, how would they use this book to go through and like walk us through how that works? Like, okay, I've done the assessment. I know that I need to work on this. What are some of the tools that I can start with to make some of these incremental changes in my habits?
Yeah, in the boldness muscle, in that entire chapter, there's a whole menu of options. And I'll just highlight one of the tools that I think HR professionals can find very, very powerful. And I'll set it up with just a quick story. Hey, Kyle, have you ever been to the casino, to a casino before?
Sure. I've lost decent amount of money at a casino before.
And I'm not talking about in the middle of the workday when you should be working. I'm talking
as far as anybody at my company knows.
Yeah, as far as anybody at the company knows. So I maybe you can relate to this. I had a casino client who had I was doing some leadership work for them, a keynote in a workshop for them. Had some different leadership topics. And over dinner one night, they were telling me about a very interesting throughput problem that they were having on the casino floor, meaning that the ratio of people that were standing around watching one game on the floor in particular to the ratio of people that were actually stepping up and putting their money down and playing the game was out of whack. It was causing kind of a throughput problem. There was traffic jams with not enough money being spent and too many people watching. So let me first, I ask you to take a guess at what casino game you think that might have been, if you had to take a wild guess. And then I'll tell you the answer and link it to what it has to do with your question.
Oh, a bunch of people watching. I'd probably say, I don't know, like roulette?
Okay, it could be that. That's actually the second bigger throughput problem. But in this case, the real problem was the craps table.
Craps.
And
okay.
For people that don't know what craps is, it's a game you play. It's a dice game that you play. And it's in a sunken kind of table. And if you look at the table, it is incredibly complicated to look at from an outsider's perspective. There's all kinds of boxes and rules and numbers written on it. And what the casino was learning was that people were literally afraid to step up and roll the dice and spend their money. Have you ever heard that saying, step up and roll the dice? Mm-hmm. That comes from casino, from the craps game.
I'll admit, I'm not one of those guys. I'm like, I don't get this. I'm not throwing my good money after bad. I don't know how the hell this all works.
Exactly right. And the casino was discovering that people were afraid to step up and risk their money because they didn't understand the rules of the game. Now, meanwhile, back at the office, right? Back at your company, guess what's happening? Employees don't want to step up and take the risk and be bold and take risks every day because they don't understand the rules of risk taking in the organization. And one of the tools I talk about in the book, in general in building risk, in helping, there's quite a few tools on how to help the organization be bolder. But one of them I talk about is about establishing the rules of risk taking. If you're a leader, if you haven't done this yet, imagine if you had a conversation with the organization and you said, guys, this is what a good risk looks like. This is what a bad risk looks like. This is what happens when you succeed with a risk. This is what happens when you fail with a risk. And hopefully it's not, an awful thing. Here's who needs to approve what level of risk for what point. Here's what you need to have to be able to move forward with a risk without asking for permission, and so on. And in the mentally strong leader, in the boldness, fortitude, habit, muscle section, or the boldness section of the book, I outline more than 20 questions that you can ask and share with your organization. Either share them as a leader or ask them as an employee to get super clear on the rules of risk-taking. Because when you are, my research shows you are far more likely to engage in bold risk-taking behavior. Make sense?
Yeah, totally. I also think especially for, I'm thinking like the avatar of somebody who maybe isn't as comfortable in the gray, right? Like I think there are some people who are they're very formulaic, and there's there's rules of engagement. It's got to be fairly debilitating to be stuck and maybe have a big idea but not feel like it fits within the paradigm of the organization's risk tolerance. So I think that's I hadn't really thought about it in that way, but it makes sense. If you want people to have this dreaming big boldness and the ability to think, use all the buzzwords you want, think outside the box, all this stuff. First they have to know where the lines are.
Yeah, that's right. As I say, in the mentally strong leader, in the boldness section of the book, to build that muscle, if you want to create boldness and foster a risk-taking spirit, you have to send the right signals and impede the wrong impulses. You send the right signals by being clear about what the rules of risk-taking are and showing that you'll reward them in some ways and celebrating when people actually fail risks. And then you also impede the wrong impulses that we normally have around risks, which are, we engage in a lot of irrational risk-avoiding behaviors. We'll do things like institute a systemic institutional no, meaning there was a piece of research that showed that just 1 in 50 managers, Kyle, just 1 in 50 managers could raise a concern about an idea, and that would be enough to kill an idea that would have been good moving forward. It becomes a systemic no that all it takes is just a little bit of momentum behind a negative impact towards a bold risk that somebody wants to take, and it can kill it. So you have to really send the right signals and impede the wrong impulses if you want to imbue a risk-taking spirit in your organization.
Wow. So that's fascinating to me. So now you're now you get some 2% of a negative context could kill a potentially great idea. That's fascinating to me. Think about that. That's literally having people's pictures coming to mind. Like the person that is gonna be the person that says no. Yeah. And then I gotta believe, I'm sure the research proves this out. Once you get enough no's, you're gonna stop asking.
That's exactly what happens, Kyle. So you have to do the opposite. You have to establish risk-taking as a necessary skill to build if you want to be the best leader that you can be. It's up to the leaders to establish the expectation and to create more of an institutional yes than an institutional no. In the early days, Amazon used to institute an institutional yes, meaning if you were a boss, you had to write a memo, a 1 or 2 page memo indicating why you wouldn't support an employee's idea, because the default was to yes, not to no. And I think in many organizations, Kyle, we've seen it flip, and that institutional no is grounded. And it's just something that as leaders, we have to really push back against.
Yeah, totally. It's another example, like an institutional incentive, literally, Mars, in their R&D department has an incentive that has a requirement to fail X% of the time. Right.
I like
if
that.
you're and if you don't hit that, then you're not taking enough risks in order to be effective in the research and development department. So like, think about that, like, especially if you're in an industry or an organization where you do have research and development or innovation is a key component, like there are ways to make this, make this a part of the organization as well, not just on a personal level, but almost societally, right, within your organization. So
yeah, that's exactly right. That is a way to establish risk taking as a expectation. Set a number to it. I like that.
I love. Yeah. Now you're talking HR language. You're like, oh, I can do something with that, right? Again, but it's small. It's a small gesture. It might, and you could even if you set it as like a 1% of somebody's incentive plan, but you put it as a measurement that matters, that's going to get people to raise their eyebrows and listen. Oh, that's new, right?
That's right.
I love it. I wish I could take credit for that, but
that's all right.
The other one I want to maybe talk a little, really kind of specifically about is confidence, because I think it's one thing to think big. It's one thing to be bold. It's one thing to be rebellious in mind and spirit, which is, what I think most of my listeners are. It's another thing to have the confidence to say something about it and to actually to actually stand up for what you believe is right, or what is, something that might be challenging or uncomfortable for the organization to hear. So I'm curious, for those of us that maybe are struggling with confidence or looking for ways to build, build that resilience and strength to be confident enough to speak up. What are some tactics that we can be thinking about as it relates to our own personal confidence levels?
Yeah, in the Mentally Strong Leader, in the confidence chapter, I talk about building the confidence habit, confidence being one of the 6 core mental muscles that equate to mental strength. There's a couple of particularly powerful tools, and there's quite a few of them in the confidence chapter, including how to build your executive presence, which I get asked about a lot. But a couple of my favorite tools in that section about building confidence, they have to do with 2 things, Kyle. Monitoring and managing your relationship with self-doubt, and monitoring your relationship with yourself. And I'll explain both. Think about that for a second, what that statement means, to monitor your relationship with self-doubt. It assumes that self-doubt always exists. Because guess what, Kyle? It does. And in my research, I've seen this, and this shouldn't be of any surprise. Even in the most confident people on the planet, there is still some level of self-doubt, and there are danger zones. You can be, overconfident all the way to the point of you can be paralyzed by a fear of failure. And in between, there's this ability to manage a healthy self-doubt, to understand that there's some level of self-doubt is always going to be there. It's up for you to manage. And I talk about that a lot in the Mentally Strong Leader in the confidence chapter. There's another tool that I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about, which is managing a relationship with yourself, which is, there's in the book, in the Mentally Strong Leader, there's what I call the self-acceptance scale. And an interesting thing happens. It goes all the way from self-acceptance, which is where it's the highest level of self-regulation, because you're regulating your emotions, your thoughts, and your behaviors. You're very self-aware. You're very accepting of yourself on one side of the scale. All the way to the other side of the scale, which is imposter syndrome, where you're having a difficult time accepting where you're at, what you've accomplished, who you are, why you are, and how you got there. And in between on the self-acceptance scale, there's all kinds of confidence bugaboos, from approval-seeking behavior to comparing to others, which is something I still have to work on, and I teach this stuff for a living, to negative inner chatter, beating yourself up over and over and over again with negative thoughts, to this sense of, I'm not enough. And by the way, if I could tell your listeners anything today, it would probably be, you are enough. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to take on everything by yourself. I think I'd like to repeat that. If you're watching, I'm going to take off my readers here. You are enough. And you don't have to take on everything by yourself. And I talk about this range of self-acceptance bugaboos that can happen. And if you look at confidence as on a scale from I can be self-accepting all the way to imposter syndrome. And in between, I can fall victim to approval seeking and comparison and negative inner chatter, and I'm not enough. If you become aware of all the ways we cave into a lack of confidence, you're probably not going to be surprised to find I also have tools in the book, in The Mentally Strong Leader, to counter each one of those ways that we tend to fall down on the confidence front.
Absolutely. And I think, it's one of those things that, again, we all have those moments of self-doubt, and the way that we treat ourselves in those moments really, really matters. And I think we are not alone, and we've got to remember that. And I think, that's part of what this community is all about. That's part of, Scott, what this book is all about, is to help people, kind of overcome some of these things and make this a better place for all of us. Right.
Yeah.
So really appreciate you putting in the effort, and just love this book. So again, the book is The Mentally Strong Leader: Build the Habits to Productively Regulate Your Emotions, Thoughts, and Behaviors. Available where books are sold. We will also have a link to that book, so you can click right in and find the book. Check it out today. Scott, thank you again for developing the book and putting these tools out there for all of us to use. With that, I want to switch gears. We're going to jump into the Rebel Flash Round. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. Where do we need to rebel?
I think we need to rebel, ready for this one, against ourselves and the quiet voices, or the not so quiet voices that we hear in our heads telling us we're not enough, we're not good enough, that other person is better. We need to stop and pause and chase authenticity rather than approval. Rebel against that dragon in your head that's barking at you that you're not good enough.
I love it. Authenticity versus approval. I love that. I think that we could all do with a little bit of that in our lives. So, question number 2, who should we be listening to?
To the people that know you and love you the most. In other words, and I'm sure this is an HR staple, right? Human resources staple. Listen to the people around you that know you best, that can help you plug in and figure out the things you need to work on. One of the big elements of mental strength is feeling secure enough to ask people around you for help and how you can grow your fortitude, confidence, boldness, decision-making, goal focus, and improve your messaging as a leader. So turn to folks around you that know best for feedback.
Love it. Love it. All right. Last question here. How can our listeners connect with you?
Yeah, you bet. You can go to scottmautz.com, SCOTTMAUTZ.com. And I put together a gift for your listeners, Kyle. If they go to scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, put that in your search parameters, scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift, they can download a 60-page PDF for free, which includes the mental strength self-assessment if they want to get a head start on it before they get the book, to find out what their scores are for each mental muscle and overall. And it also includes prompts to help you get the most out of the book and space to take notes. And it's a really nice all-encapsulated workbook. So scottmautz.com/mentally strong gift.
Love it. Love it. We will have that link right there in the show notes in the podcast player. Open it up, click in. And Scott, just love the opportunity to connect with you today. Again, thank you so much for putting this book out there. You're going to help a lot of us. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for what you do too, Kyle.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.